Well, thank you. So, as I mentioned before, my name is Guillermo Christensen, and I am a lawyer with the law firm of K&L Gates. It's a fairly large global law firm based mainly in the United States. I live and work in Washington, D.C. I have a practice, my legal practice is built around national security and cybersecurity. And it's cybersecurity especially is a fairly new type of legal practice in the United States, and I think anywhere in the world. And it focuses on dealing with all of the legal issues that happen when there are problems with information technology, with cybersecurity equipment, with data privacy. So for example, I would say almost every week we have an incident where hackers break into the computer system of a company and steal information or attack the company, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. That usually involves some legal liabilities for the company. It could be that the company faces lawsuits from people whose information has been stolen. It could be that the company faces legal issues from other companies because they have a contract or they have some kind of shareholder class action brought against them, meaning the owners, the shareholders of the company sue it because they believe that the company has not protected the information correctly. And that's probably the most important thing that's changing, is that there are now laws and regulations in the United States, but also in other countries, that require companies to protect information, and when they don't, that's when there's a legal issue that the company faces. That's very different than it was 20 years ago, and I expect that in the next 10 years it will be even more like that around the world. So we've had some very large litigations involving banks and companies that hold a lot of data. So my profession as a cybersecurity lawyer is becoming a very fast-growing area of the law. It's also a very interesting area because it's very different than many areas of legal practice. You have to have a fairly strong technical background to understand the issues. So I think as lawyers, we often pride ourselves in we can take on almost any litigation. We can learn it, and you give us the file. You know, I remember with my good friends when I was in London for a period studying there, that the Queen's Counsel, or now the King's Counsel, were famous for picking up a file and walking right into court to deliver their arguments. And they're very good at it. With cybersecurity issues and technology, that's not possible. You can't learn the complexities of technology by reading a file and walking into court. At least I've never met anybody who could. That would be really what we would call a recipe for disaster. So it really does require a much greater technical background and specialization. And so that's an interesting challenge for many lawyers coming out of law school who don't have technical skills in these areas. On the other hand, it opens up some interesting possibilities for people who have technical backgrounds to go to law school to become lawyers with that technical background. And many of the people that I work with, that's what they did. Perhaps they were a technology engineer, maybe they were a cybersecurity expert, and then they go to law school and they get the background to do that. My background is a little bit different. I started out as an intelligence officer, so I have that background. I was very lucky. My father was a computer scientist a long time ago.
The combination.
Yes. So I think I can safely say now that a long time has passed that as a teenager I was a bit of a hacker.
It came handy.
Yes, it came in handy. And it helps a lot now. So that's what, that's why I think being a cybersecurity lawyer is also very interesting. It changes every day. I don't think I've had the same case or the same set of issues come up very frequently. So everything is a new challenge, and I like that. There are people who like to do the same thing over and over again. They probably shouldn't go into cybersecurity. So that's one area. And then the other area that that I think is very interesting and that I have found fascinating in my career is the area of data privacy. And today, I think everyone I know is worried about their privacy, right? We all use those phones too much. We have too much information on them, but they're become an essential part of it. I mean, could you imagine not having the ability to talk to your family, to your friends, to your colleagues, and exchange emails every day? It would be very difficult. When I've been somewhere where I haven't had access to the phone for a couple of days, I feel like I imagine someone who's been on drugs. Yeah, you feel like, oh, I'm getting, so. But the reality is that we have trust in these devices, whether we want to trust them or not, and we share an enormous amount of information on them, and we don't yet have good rules, whether from government or the private sector, about what we should do with this information. And so that's another area that I think is changing very quickly, and it's going to change a lot in the next 20 years, 30 years. And all of that is lawyer work, because we're talking about rules that ultimately government and regulators have to come up with, and they're rules that lawyers are going to have to implement, whether lawyers from the government, like my colleague from the Department of Justice who's here, or lawyers working for companies who are trying to understand what can I do with this information that my customers have given me, or lawyers for the defense when someone is accused of doing something that appears to be wrong. So lawyers need to understand how data works, and that again, it requires a lot of attention to technology and how systems work, how data can be manipulated. In the future, we're going to see some very disturbing things coming. One of them that I spoke about in the lectures I've given is something we call deep fakes. And deep fakes are computers. So you may have seen in some of the movies that are out now where they take someone that is no longer alive and they make them show up on the screen. The actor is recreated by technology. Well, that same technology can be used to create a copy of you with video, with sound, that speaks and appears to be you. Now imagine if you can do that, and eventually it will happen in real time, meaning you could be on your phone speaking with someone, and it's actually an avatar. It's actually a copy of that person, and they can use both technology and just faking who they are to make you believe that that's the person you're talking to.
So it's a type of fraud.
Yes, and it will become very difficult, I think, to detect. So we're going to have a different way to think about trust in our world, which is another issue that lawyers have to confront. What happens, I mean, today, with COVID, we have become accustomed to having, we were speaking about mediations, but even the courts in the United States, courts moved very quickly, incredibly quickly. I mean, courts, I don't know about Kuwait, but in the United States, with all due respect to all the judges that I know, courts are very traditional and they don't make changes very quickly. Our Supreme Court, for example, still does not allow cameras to record the hearings. Yeah. They do audio, but not video, which is, there are reasons for it, but that tells you something about how uncomfortable courts are with modern technology. Well, what happens if all of these these advances we've made to allow remote hearings and remote depositions and remote trials, if the person on the other side is actually not the person that's being that's on trial, it's a fake, and someone is controlling what they're saying. I mean, that could be one way to essentially have fraud on the court. But equally likely is that that's going to be the way that people fake their way into breaking into computers and breaking into companies. So it's going to be a very challenging technology for us to deal with.
And critical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
First of all, thank you for your lecture. It's been, it's so enriching, and so you just enlightened us of so many problems. As I've heard and read in somewhere, it says that we are living in the future right now. It's not we are going to see the future. We are living it. So, and we are having so many challenges. I have so many questions from my colleagues. Just one question I would like to take from Ms. Shahid that she sent me. The obstacles of international cooperation and the lack of global consistent legal framework. So I think this is one challenge. That's why you are reaching out around the world.
It is a challenge, and I've had the honor of working with the State Department. I was a policy advisor in Paris at the OECD, which is one of the international organizations dedicated to economic cooperation. And so I saw firsthand there both the promise and the challenge of international cooperation on things like data privacy and internet governance. And it is a big challenge because when you look at how different countries regulate issues around data privacy, it's very much based on your own legal system. And so to take, for example, the US or the British common law model, we have really a very different way of looking at the world as lawyers than, say, the continental European model with a civil code. In the US, our basic concept is everything that is not prohibited is allowed. In the civil code system, and I'm simplifying this tremendously, but in the civil code, it has to be specifically provided in order for it to be permitted.
Okay.
So in some ways, that gives you a different, a sense of how different one can be in the way we approach these issues. That said, in Europe, privacy has been a very important issue, and I do believe that privacy is a basic human right. And even though it's not in the U.S. Constitution directly, I think we have accepted that it exists in a different form, in the sense that we need privacy, we need the safety of being able to have our own thoughts private, so that we can be human beings, free human beings. In Europe, it's actually in their basic human rights. So consequently, in Europe, they have done things like the GDPR, which is, and that builds on other efforts around privacy, where it's much clearer that they expect that you, as an individual, must give consent for your information to be used by others, including by companies. In the U.S., we had for a long time a system that wasn't much of a system. Companies could collect and use information pretty much any way they wanted, with a few limitations. They couldn't tell you that they were going to do something and not do it, because then they would have a problem with something called the Federal Trade Commission, which tries to keep companies honest by holding them to what they say. But if the company didn't say anything, then there wasn't anything for them to be held accountable for. We've started to change. And today, every state, all 50 states in the United States, have a data privacy law of some kind. And some of them, like California, have laws that are very much like a GDPR. Now, that's a challenge because if you have 50 state laws and they're all different, and you have a data breach that impacts 50 states, you have 50 state laws that you have to deal with. And we have that happen sometimes.
You need to know which jurisdiction it lies under.
And if it lies in all 50, then you have to deal with it in all 50.
Oh, that's not...
That's a hard problem. It obviously is good for lawyers in terms of our business because, you know, if there are no problems, then you probably don't need lawyers.
Yeah, of course.
So in a sense, our system is very friendly towards lawyers, but it's not friendly towards companies. It's not friendly towards individuals. So I expect there have been draft laws in front of Congress now for some time to create a single federal privacy law in the United States. I think that will happen sooner than later. Whether that will bring the laws up to the same level or take the best ones or the most stringent ones down, I don't know. But I think in general, uniformity and predictability in the law is a very good thing. And so I'm hopeful that when that happens, it'll be a little bit less challenging for companies and governments to enforce these. But that's if something happens just in the United States. But we also deal with a lot of data incidents that have an international component. So we might have a company that has a cloud service.
Yeah.
And you know, cloud service, as somebody put it, is a cloud is when you're working on someone else's computer. So in other words, you have your data and it's somewhere else, and you may not know where it is. And so the challenge is you have a data incident, and you might have data in 10 states in the United States, in Britain, in France, and you then have to deal with different laws and how they apply in those places. What do you have to tell the government? What kinds of legal actions would you face? And as lawyers, you can appreciate, if you have to defend a client in 2 or more different courts, and the courts have a different approach to evidence and to arguments, what you say in one court could be damaging in the other. So sometimes you are caught in a very difficult situation. So that's another issue. And then the other challenge on the international side is what do you do about the criminals? Because the criminals are probably the most international group that you can imagine. They will work with anyone, and they do. Some of the biggest hacking groups we see may be based in Russia, but they use hackers in all other countries because they use the same tools that we use. They use the cloud. They use social engineering, social networks to interact. So they don't have rules to follow, so they can work very well across borders. Our police, our ministries of justice, they can't do that. They have to follow the rules. So if, say, for example, the Department of Justice in the United States is trying to bring a prosecution against a hacking group that's based, let's say, in somewhere in the Middle East, they can't get on the airplane, come here, obviously, find them, arrest them, and take them back. That's not how we do things. Instead, they have to work through these mechanisms where the Department of Justice in the United States works through the State Department, which works through the embassy, and they will have a colleague like Jason here helping with this, who will then work with the Kuwaiti government to get the process, the necessary letters rogatory, all those terms to get the evidence, or an extradition request if there's a human being involved. On average, extraditions take years. On average, evidence requests can take months or more. The criminals take minutes and seconds to cooperate. So we have a big disadvantage. Now, we can't change. We have to follow rules, and we have the rules for a good reason. But we need to find ways to, as there's a very well-known cybersecurity expert in the United States called Bruce Schneier, and he speaks about hacking, not just hacking the systems, the technology, but hacking the systems, the rules. And we almost need some hacking on our rules for cooperation internationally.
You need a hacker to get one.
Yes.
Some like, let's say, I don't know if governmental entities, but some companies, banks, stuff like that, they hire hackers in
Yes.
order to test their systems.
Yes.
So that's I think it's a great thing to do.
It's a fantastic way to test your security. We call it red teams.
Okay.
So blue teams are the teams inside the company that defend.
Mm-hmm.
A red team is a team that attacks the systems with the company's approval
Authority, yes.
to see what can happen. And I often hire those teams to help when we are doing because the other thing we do is we also help companies to test their systems and to build better systems. In fact, I would rather do that than help the company after they've been hacked.
Yes.
I would much
Prevent,
rather
yeah.
prevent. It's a lot easier.
To have a precaution.
Yes, and it's a lot better for the company, and it's much cheaper for the company
Yeah.
to do that
Yeah.
than to call me after something
And to
happens.
sue, yeah.
So, but yes, we will hire them, and I have yet to have one of those tests where they were not able to get in. They always get in.
Yeah.
They always get in, and that's good because everything they find we can fix, and it helps. So.
Yeah. It's like something you see where are the weak points of
Yes.
the system.
Yes.
So,
Just
yeah.
like as lawyers, if you are ready, you're getting ready to present a difficult argument in front of the court, you go and we call them moot courts, right?
Yes.
Right?
we go more towards it.
And you have your colleagues there hearing your arguments and trying to poke holes in your arguments
Correct, yeah.
because you want to anticipate what your opponent will say and have a good response for it. Exactly the same thing. So a moot court is like a pen test, we call them, a penetration test.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. And we have more questions.
Actually, I have two.
Please.
So my name is Shahad Al-Rubayan. I am the managing partner of SMR Attorneys. It's a boutique law firm that specializes in corporate and commercial litigation. So I had one regarding jurisdictional challenges, but I think you...
Covered
Did I
it.
answer it? Okay.
Yeah, somehow.
Okay.
We need a lot regarding this matter, but I mean, it's really difficult to maintain an understanding. So my other question is regarding the risk management regime. I don't think people understand, the risk. Like, for example, in Kuwait, we have a problem regarding social media misuse.
Mhm.
So we have, like, identity theft, we have harassment online. I don't think people, like, get it, So they go into, like, an application, and then they agree on the terms of business, and they agree on, like, cookies, and they don't understand, like, where this is going. Another issue that we faced, I wish I could talk further about it, but, because I'm involved and I can't, like,
Sure.
disclose more information. I'm sure you understand data privacy, so you would want me to go there. So regarding that matter, I think we have another huge issue that even, I'll say, the government and the public institutions are facing, which is remote access to servers. I think that's a big problem.
Mhm.
I don't understand how it happens. But I know that certain employees of, let's say, a public facility or a public institution, even a private institution, who have access to the servers would actually faced problems outside the country using a local server. So if you would be kind to further elaborate on those matters. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
And what you've described is a problem that I see in every country, because it's not a country or a culture specific, it's a technology problem, right? So when you look at the privacy policies or the data use policies on many of these services, the applications, with all due respect, they're written by lawyers, so nobody can understand them. I read them and I don't sometimes understand them.
I draft them, I sometimes don't understand.
And you don't understand them, exactly. I wasn't going to say that, but I may have drafted some that are not understandable. It's a problem because we are, if you're talking lawyer to lawyer, you can use the short versions of terms that we learn to use. We have our language, right? We have the language of our profession, which only works inside our profession. Everyone else either doesn't understand it or misunderstands what we mean. But these agreements need to be comprehensible, they need to be understandable by the people who are going to use them, which is everybody. So one of the things that I've seen, and I think it's a good improvement, is that every privacy policy needs to have a consumer-friendly summary. In other words, you could have the longer version, that's like a legal contract, but it needs to have a description which needs to be accurate and needs to be compatible with the whole contract, telling the person who's going to use your service, whether it's Facebook or something in China, that these are the privacy protections in this program. This is what we're going to do with your data. This is what we're not going to do with your data. And if we decide to change what we're going to do, we're going to tell you this way. I think that's essential. That's something that has to be obligatory for anyone that proposes to use data from our information that is collecting our information. In the data privacy world, we have a term that covers everything you do with data, and that's processing. So it's everything from when I first collect it, moving it, copying it, analyzing it, all the way to destroying it, processing. So anytime you have data processing happening that involves an individual, there should be a legal regimen, a legal setup that covers all the obligations, and it needs to be expressed in a clear way to the consumer. Otherwise, the individual is at a great risk because it's unintelligible sometimes what's in there. So that's something that I think has to be adopted on a country-by-country basis. I don't think that that's something that's possible to do at an international level, but I do think that it would be, and I think it is happening, that you have more of a convergence at the international level between different systems. So like I say, the European GDPR and California, they're fairly similar in some significant ways. Excuse me. One area in particular is the concept of consent. So this is a big difference. This is a big change in the United States. We are moving to a system where I have to consent. I have to agree for you to collect my information. I have to agree for you to use my information. And if I change my mind, I withdraw my consent, then you have to stop using my information. That's a huge change from the data use in the United States, because before, your data could be collected, and some of the biggest data breaches in the United States happened not from the people who collect your data, but it's the people who get that data from them. They're called data aggregators, very large companies that make a lot of money from collecting the information, analyzing it, but you never actually give them your information. You gave it to someone else, and they bought it.
Third party.
Exactly. So that third-party issue is a problem. And it's frustrating. I've had my data stolen from some of those companies, and you don't really, as an individual, you don't really have legal recourse. You don't really have a way to challenge that company right now with laws, and the government, of course, can do something about that. But I think that those things, in some respects, have to be made simpler and more direct than they have been. But that to me is, you need to have some rules from the public sector side, from the government, that set some standards for how that should happen. And I think in as you think about that for Kuwait, you also have to think about the vulnerable populations, because, and vulnerable could be both the young and the elderly. So, I saw this with my own family. I've seen that with friends where, someone who's at home, retired during COVID, was hacked, and a lot of people really think that whatever is on their device is true, is 100% real, if it's there, because in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, it was very hard for a criminal to reach out to them, right? I mean, one of the biggest differences between cybercrime and real crime is, if I want to steal money from you at home, I have to be here, I have to go to your house, I have to break into your house, find the money, But if it's cybercrime, I can be in Moscow, I can be in Beijing, I could be in Washington, D.C., and I can access your money in your bank from there, and you'll not even know where I came from. You might not even find out that I stole from you for a while. So it's a very different problem, and the protections need to be changed. There's a need for us to modernize the law to keep up with the technology, and law doesn't move very quickly, and so that's a challenge.
Thank you.
So we've come across a wave of cases, fraud cases specifically to do with banks. Around, I think, 400 or 500 victims have been subject of fraud, where they steal their bank information and they take all their assets in their banks. This has happened in the, I think, past few months alone. 500 to 600 cases. I'm not sure what the number has been reached. The banks, they have denied all their responsibilities on a single basis, which is kind of legal. It's an untouched area, but the interpretation is in favor of the banks. They've said that the vulnerabilities are usually from the people themselves. It's not from the data. There's nothing that prohibits data being collected or spread, and the bank can't really be responsible for these kind of breaches, because we can't even know the source of the breach. We don't know where the violation lies. So all these cases, their entire purpose is to find the criminal, and like the example that you put, that it's going to take months and even years, whereas the core of the problem, or the solution that they're trying to find, is people want their money back, but they won't ever get it. So this is something else that with the emerging technologies coming out, and even the laws from outside. So on one side, we have to do with the, I'm jumping through a lot of thoughts. So to do with data privacy. In the Constitution and in our legislation, we haven't tackled that matter. The only thing that that's explicitly stated to be prohibited and to be private is medical records and a person's financial status. Those are the only two things. Whereas companies like insurance companies and major retailers, with their huge databases, if they were breached or shared, it wouldn't imply any responsibility on these companies. That's something that our laws haven't tackled. On the other side, this is also to do with the bank cases. On the other side, the fraudulent cases themselves, they won't result in any kind of tangible interest. So nobody will get their money back. So how do we tackle these problems?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, one more thing to do to tie up all these knots. The biggest problem we have to do with all these cases, and you have mentioned this, that the court and the entire basis of all the laws, they're looking for stability. But to tackle cybercrime, we need to actually we need to plant the idea of poking holes into people's trust so they could know better.
Yeah.
So how do we compromise trust and at the same time look for stability? So that would be my question.
And I will say that you are describing a situation that is still very much a challenge for us in the United States, and I think also in Europe and other places. It's, but a couple of thoughts. First, following up on your question and your comments, you do need frameworks. You do need a structure to be able to figure out the problems and the right ways to address the challenges. So, for example, fraud in the banking system. We still have this problem in the United States the same way. An individual gets hacked and money gets taken out of their account. The first question is, where did that happen? Was it on their end or on the bank system? But that's only the beginning, because in addition, there are people in between, right? So there's the bank, there's you with your banking application on your iPhone, but then there are lots of steps along the way where your information might also have been compromised. So one of the first things that we do when we are looking at a situation like that is we hire experts to trace the cause of the problem. Quite often, it may well be the individual who used a poor password and didn't follow the process that they should have followed. But then the question you have is should the individual have all the responsibility to protect that? Or is there some obligation by the institution, by the company, to put in place some security measures to help the individual? Because at a level, it's consumer rights in a sense, right? How can any of us be the expert on whether the security that this bank is offering is good or not? That's practically impossible. So that's where I think some frameworks and some basic standards of cybersecurity are necessary. And in the financial sector in the United States, we have very detailed cybersecurity standards now. I'd say the banking sector is probably the best defended, and it's taken a long time. But I think that it has to be, the risk has to be, in a sense, placed on those who can best mitigate it. And it's not most likely the individual, because if you want to mitigate your risk of being hacked in your bank account, probably the best thing you can do is not use a bank, right? And that would not be. So in a sense, it's also the business for the banks is to get better, because the more hacks there are, the more they need to show that they are actually good at protecting information. So my suspicion is that it's going to be a combination of market forces. If you have maybe, let's say, 2,000 banks, and 100 are good at security and they almost never get hacked, 1,000 are okay, and then 500-600 are terrible, maybe over time people will figure out, maybe I should not bank with those, I should bank over here, especially if they lose their money and they don't get it back, right? So that's one part of it. But I think also some of this has to obviously come from the regulators, so the banking regulators. And I think when I was here for my first visit, and we spoke on these issues back then as well, I think that there's more activity on the banking side to put in better rules. As with almost everything in this area, I would say more quickly and is really important, because we're falling behind. Even though we're moving forward, the criminals are moving much more quickly. So I think that's really important. It is the biggest challenge in the data privacy world, is the imbalance between what the individual can do and what these large companies have with their data. And I think that those are, and I think that's the trend. I think over time you're going to see almost everybody using payment systems on phones. Now, for example, when I said, so nothing is perfect, well, if you lose your phone, you could have that there. But if you lose your wallet, the same thing. And here's the difference. If you lose your phone and you have it set up, you can wipe it remotely, right? And that's why it's important to have a backup as well. So if say, you leave your phone today at the gasoline station when you go pay for gas, you get home and you can't find it, you can look up, where is it? And if you see it there, my advice is always wipe it if you have a backup, go get it, and then restore it. I don't like the idea of leaving my information somewhere, but you can't do that with your wallet. You can't remotely wipe your wallet if you leave it, or your purse, right? So again, there are some advantages to technology.
Yes.
So.
That's wonderful. Let's say, Mr. Hamid.
What about our information or our privacy against a huge company like, for example, as a Google?
Yeah.
I think they know anything about us, like a Google Map. We research
Yeah.
how we can say.
Yeah. So back to the question about frameworks. First is that companies like that, we need as a people to have laws and regulations that lay out what they can and cannot do with our private information. That's number one. But the other thing is, I think as individuals, we also do need to be more educated about the information that's being collected from us. So for example, and I'll just use Google as an example since you mentioned it. You can go onto Google and get, I think they call it Takeout, Google Takeout, and you can download all of the information that Google has collected on you. All of the information on maps, all of your photos, all of the data points. You can get it. It's a lot. Depending on how long you've been on Google, it's a lot of information. But I would start with doing that so you can understand what they know about you. And then you can make some decisions about, well, do I want to share that information with them? So for example, maybe you're not comfortable sharing where you're located all the time if you use Google Maps. So you could switch to using a different GPS system, a different mapping service. And if you use different companies, there's more, it's more likely that each one doesn't talk to the other, so you have some privacy because it's different places where your data is. But it starts by understanding how much information is out there that's being collected. Some companies it's easier, like I think Google would be, you can get all that and take a look at it. But we do need to be more educated users of technology to understand, just what is happening. Otherwise, and it's not, I'm not saying it's easy, we have to do the work ourselves, but I think that that's essential. And then when we know, as citizens, we can obviously interact with our government to encourage governments to adopt better rules. And as lawyers, we have an even better, more direct way to influence this through laws. So.
There's a movement going on, it's called de-Googling.
Yes. Yeah.
Android ROMs and things like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite give you the convenience of having Google. You have to download the third parties and constant maintenance, and
Yeah.
so everything is more manual.
Yeah.
It's actually went out of control even to a point where your thoughts and whatever you would think about can pop out as an ad in Google or Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel
faced-
that this is,
yeah, I
everybody
faced it
did,
too, yeah.
and
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are talking about this.
Yeah.
So I feel that this is a very big breach in privacy with your own thoughts.
Yeah.
That has to be managed.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those issues when you try to balance the convenience versus the privacy and the security. So, if you think about Google is free, right? You don't unless you're using it for your company, you're not paying anything to use their service. That's another way of saying that you are the service, right? You are the product in a sense. So, or your data is. So with Google, they were very clear about this. When you use Google Gmail, they were scanning machines, not individuals. Machines were scanning your emails to determine the best ads, the advertisements that were most likely to appeal to you. That's why when you open Google and you're looking at products, down the side the advertisements are
List of your
things that
thoughts.
you have been thinking about, right? And so it's a very direct connection between that. So if you object to that, then I imagine what Google would say, and it's certainly what I would say. Don't use Google. Use a different service.
Yeah.
And then people say, but if I don't use Google, then I don't get this. Well, they're giving you that service, but there's a price, and the price is your privacy or your data. And so a big question is, are they paying what's the value of that data? Probably not, but how do you determine that? So the way I think it gets determined is by consumers changing their approach. And you see it. So more and more people now are using other devices. The de-Googling is one approach, but I think it's one of the reasons why there are alternatives to Google, that they claim not to use your data in the same way, and you pay more for the phone or for the service. So
it has its advantages and disadvantages. The rate is up to you.
And that's where we come back to the question about you have to be an informed
Yeah.
consumer in order to understand the trade-offs that are being made. So
So it's complicated.
it's
We can.
always complicated.
Okay.
Well, it is, it's difficult, and I worry, I really worry a lot about, like I say, the more vulnerable populations, the elderly or kids. Although I will say that I think, certainly as I speak with my son and I speak with the younger generations of lawyers who are entering practice now, I think they're both more informed about some things, but also less about others. So it's interesting that they know a lot about social media and they know a lot about, well, I shouldn't share this. But when you ask them, well, how do you get the internet? They think the internet just comes in on the phone. They don't, because they never had to have
The connection.
a modem, all those things. They don't understand there's actually all this other stuff. I mean, some of them have never had an internet service at home because they just get it on the
On
phone.
the phone, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of that.
They didn't go through it from the start. They jumped to it. They took it
jumped to
for granted
Yeah.
from that.
Yeah.
That's the
So
difference.
they're more comfortable with some things than others.
others.
But they also sometimes I think of it in the same way that 20, 30 years ago, if you had a car, you had to know how to fix a lot of things in a car because they broke down all the
Yes.
time. Today, electric cars, they really don't, all you have to do is plug them in to charge. So if the tire goes flat, most most people, I would say, what do I do now? I have to call somebody to come fix the tire. I still know how to take the tire out of the back and
Yeah.
fix it, if there's a tire in the back, I would say.
Yeah.
But with technology, it's the same thing. If a computer stops working, there are a lot of people who only have phones who, well, what do I do?
Google it.
Google it, yes,
Yeah, Google it.
exactly.
Yeah, so that's
So-
unfortunate.
That, and that's a problem with how, how easy the technology is. We stop thinking about how it works.
Yeah, that's a
So,
Even with deep fakes, as deep as the technology is and as complex as it is, right now there are public websites where you just enter a few images and they create reality.
yes.
Oh,
Yes.
sure. I have a question.
Yes, please.
AI, artificial intelligence, that and what we face as obstacles, and that's gonna be like, is it really gonna be let's say, are we gonna work with AI soon, or is it just like a myth?
Oh, no, you are working, whether you
With
know it or
AI.
not, with AI already. So it's embedded in many, many different ways in the things you already do. The challenge is that AI is a very, very big concept, very broad concept with lots of different parts to it. So, for example, when you use your maps on your phone to figure out a route, there's a lot of artificial intelligence that goes into determining which route is the one that makes the most sense
Actually makes sense.
at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, or Siri, yes. They're relying on not just the information, but also applying some intelligence to trying to understand the optimum solution for you. So that's there. Lawyers, law firms are turning to AI very quickly. So, for example, analyzing large contracts. Some of these contracts that are 500-600 pages long, we use AI. We have AI tools that, no kidding, often do a better job at the beginning than a lot of the younger lawyers. Because the AI has all of the experience of hundreds, actually tens of thousands of lawyers. So, and that's where you get into a subset of AI, which is essentially a program that has been trained by human beings. It follows us. So we would do this sometimes with document discovery, where you're searching for something in a lot of documents. And so you would have a program that essentially would train on what I was doing or what a lawyer was doing. This thing, so I would look at a document and say, it's relevant because this term is here. I'd mark it relevant, or not relevant, or needs to be reviewed. And the software would be studying every time I did this across a big group. After a couple of days, you have the software start doing that. And when you go to look at what it's doing, it's often better than the human beings because the software doesn't get tired. The software is repeating and can be analyzed for how it's repeating. So the other thing I can do is if I go to court and we missed a document or the other side missed a document, I can say, so show me the algorithm that you used to produce this. And you can look and say, yeah, but you left this out. If it's a human being that missed it,
You cannot see.
were they tired? Were they not paying attention? So there's good and bad, right? So, but it's already being used.
But would AI replace lawyers soon?
It's replacing some kinds of work,
Who's in the process?
some kinds of work for some lawyers, yes.
Some lawyers.
But look, technology is replacing a lot of work for a lot of people. Lawyers are no different, so, and there's a lot of work we do that's,
We can look at it this way. Like, for example, a simple example I always give them. If you have a restaurant and you have in the kitchen so many cookers, back then you would have more employees in the kitchen to cut stuff. Now you have the blender, you have the cutter, so you can replace some of the people, but you don't replace a human being, the main profession.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
That's
In the kitchen, you know, there are restaurants that have, that are almost all robots now.
But you need somebody to tell them what does.
To program them.
Yes. See?
Until the AI starts programming the robots,
Yeah.
which
Then
is,
we don't have a
which,
real problem.
Yeah.
well, again, it's,
Sad discussion.
well, but, you know, there's the good and the bad, right? So there are a lot of jobs, there are a lot of things that we have to do, that someone has to do, that are not pleasant, that are not interesting. So as a lawyer, I think probably the least interesting thing that I can imagine doing is document review,
Yes.
right? It's mindless work almost. You take that away, turn it over to a computer, and then the lawyers can be involved in doing the interesting work, the more intellectually stimulating work. It might also mean we need fewer lawyers. Maybe they can, you know, but maybe they'll go do something else that's
Yeah, we will-
equally good and productive.
No, with the updates and the developments that we are having, the technology, there might be a new field of law, like for example.
Oh, yes.
What you have mentioned, and also Bitcoin, stuff like that. It's never ending. Problems are never ending. So you maybe will have more fields of the profession.
Yeah.
Mr. Christensen, I feel like I need to contribute something. Obviously, we've talked about
Yes.
cyber criminals and how they take advantage of data. But it's a two-way street, and occasionally the sovereign gets to take advantage of data as well. In fact, more often than not. Before I was moving to Kuwait this summer in preparation for the move, just to give you an idea of how casual this is not a big deal, the story I'm about to tell you. I was winding down my larger prosecutions and investigations in Houston and trying to find things to do while I'm dealing with moving and the transfer and everything. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to me and asked me to help them solve a murder. They said, we've got this shooting down, you know, in this area of Houston. We have no idea who did it. You know, can you help us out since you've got some extra time to work on some things that aren't necessarily going to be time consuming? I said, sure. So the first thing I did was I got a judge to sign an order for a geofence. A geofence will order Google to turn over all of the individuals who are in that area that I've mapped at a specific time. Once I had the list of 200 or so names that were in that area at the time of the murder, I had Texas DPS cross-reference it with vehicle registration to match which one of those 200 people owned a vehicle that matched the description of the murder vehicle. Once I had those two things lined up, I got a search warrant order to seize that person's cell phone. And through the use of seized data, we solved a murder.
That
That's
really
wonderful.
happens in real life?
Yes.
How's the movies?
No, that was
No.
real. It took me about a month.
It's very impressive.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful.
So
Yeah.
the sovereign can certainly take advantage of data collection as well.
No.
It's excellent.
This
Yeah.
was in the 80s. I think it would be a Netflix documentary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing. Every day, someone is coming up with an incredible way to use data to solve a problem that seemed to be almost impossible. So, Jason's challenge in finding is alleged murder or
Yes, it's alleged.
it's alleged still. Okay.
Yes.
So that's the kind of problem that, you know, that person a decade before would have probably would not have been caught for a very long time until they did something else or they made a mistake. There's the flip side, which is that we have to recognize government also has a lot of information about us. So there are those issues. Now, the good thing about the way we do it in the United States is for Jason to get that information, he had to go to a judge and show some probable cause, some reason why the government could get to the information that these private individuals had shared. And that's an important control that you should have before government can have that data,
We have it
because
from the public prosecution, not from a judge.
from a judge, okay.
From a public prosecutor.
Yeah.
So he gives us a warning.
You get right.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important, because the reality is not just Google, but many other entities in the government can have a tremendous access to information. So we do need to have those controls, but they can be very effective. Another way it can be very effective is during COVID, during coronavirus, just like with the influenza, we can actually see. So Google can tell us where infections are happening before people even know that they are infected. Because when you Google the symptoms, the early symptoms of some sickness, like influenza, say what to do about itchy throat and sniffles, they do this on such a big scale, they can see what they call a heat map, so they can actually see the red in an area before the medical authorities in that state or in that country know that's happening. Because they're getting the information from the individual, and the individual doesn't yet know.
That is
The most interesting version of this that I'll tell you is a very large retailer, so a company in the United States that has big stores, figured out some time back that when a woman was searching for certain things, it meant she was probably expecting a child before she even knew. So they could tell, I think it was some kinds of skin lotion or things like that, that if you looked at that across every search, 99% of the time, those search terms meant that she was probably expecting a child.
Oh.
Interesting. Now here's where it gets a bit crazy. There was a young girl whose father started receiving offers for diapers, for a stroller, for the things that you would buy if you were expecting a child. And he was absolutely infuriated. He went and he complained. Why are you sending me all this information? My daughter is not expecting a child. Turned out she was. And so there was a big privacy issue. Now, the company didn't actually ask the daughter whether she was pregnant. They just could use the data to make that assumption. How private is that? How, sensitive is that? And so obviously they changed at that point the advertisements that they sent based on that. But it just tells you that even if you you may not realize that you are sharing information that is so private because of what you do. So when you search, you might not realize that you are actually, at that point, you are giving this massive data machine an indication about something you are thinking about, that in your mind, you haven't yet made the connection as to why you're doing that. So, again, it's good and bad. It might be in the future, your phone will tell you, or will say to me, Guillermo, you probably should go see the doctor today. Why? Because yesterday you weren't walking the same way, and I use an Apple Watch which tells me how I walk. It actually tells you when you lift your foot and put your next foot over, are you walking in a stable way? It's great for the elderly because it starts warning them, you're not walking stable. So it takes that, it might take my temperature, and it might notice that I haven't eaten the same food today that I normally eat. It would say, those symptoms, those are characteristics of someone who's about to have a stroke or a heart attack. Go see your doctor. And the watch today can do that. It can tell you your heart rate is irregular. So the good side of this is it can save your life. The bad side is it might tell somebody something very private about you that you don't even know yet.
Or
That
just
was-
keep you paranoid.
Just give you paranoid.
I could not agree more. A healthy sense of paranoia has, I would just tell you, has saved my life and keeps me safe from a lot of things. So yes, no, always sleep with one eye open. No, just kidding. That would be very hard. But
That was
anyway,
that was
so.
very, very interesting, very enriching, and thank you very much for your time. I know we don't want to take more time.
Oh no, I think my colleagues
There's two
probably.
separate cars, and I,
Oh, you can
Ah,
go.
okay.
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 Yeah.
Well, can we have a group photo before you go?